What's going on, collective listeners? Welcome back to another episode. We really appreciate you guys tuning in. I'm your host, Anthony Grasso, obviously, and today we're with Shannon Phillips, who's the assistant strength and conditioning coach at Florida State University down in Florida. It's Tallahassee. We've got a little volleyball and beach volleyball are the teams that she's working with now, but she comes from a wide array of experiences. She's got a ton of different experiences at all different levels, and she's just awesome all around. So, in this episode, we kind of get into how she's a different coach now, professionally and personally than she was before. Strengths and weaknesses. And we also talk about, cultural differences from sport to sport. And, Shannon kind of dives into what she feels we need to be doing as a profession to continue to invest in the people and the interns and those who are going to be, coaching our kids down the line. So it's a great episode, incredible insight from Shannon. Hope you guys enjoy it. Let's get into it. What's going on, collective listeners? Welcome back to another episode. Appreciate you guys tuning in. Today, we are joined by Shannon Phillips, who is the assistant strength and conditioning coach at Florida State University. She was with volleyball and beach volleyball. So, Shannon, welcome to the podcast. We appreciate you hopping on, especially on such short notice. And I know that you've obviously got some preseason stuff going on. Things are probably starting to ramp up over there down in Florida. But welcome. If you want to just kind of introduce yourself to the listeners and let us know your story, where this whole thing started and where you're at now.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Ant. I'm really happy that you asked me to be on. I actually frequently listen to the pod, so I'm happy to hop on here. Yeah, for sure. So Shannon Phillips, I am a volleyball player by trade. I was a walk-on at a Division I school, Radford University, coming out of high school. I spent a year at Radford, and after a year, I transferred to a D3 school back home in like the Philadelphia area, Pennsylvania. When I transferred back, there was no weight room back where I transferred schools to. So I had an amazing experience with my strength coach at Radford, just someone that I really felt like was investing in me more than just like the volleyball skill level that I was coming in with, but just like wanted to see me get better and improve and grow. And so then leaving and not having that person, but also not the physical space either, it really kind of piqued my interest. So I finished playing my 3 years eligibility at Eastern University. And then I guess the summer going into my senior year, I was, exercise science major, not really sure what I was going to do next. And I decided, okay, let me venture down this strength and conditioning route. So I reached back out to one of my strength coaches from Radford all the way back when I was there, and got some advice and studied for my CSCS and sat for it in the fall. And then in the spring, my last semester of undergrad, took an internship at Temple University. I had a phenomenal experience. I worked with pretty much all the Olympic sports and just kind of getting a feel for being back at that Division I level and just kind of seeing how firing on all cylinders looked. They have a bunch of teams there, and everybody's kind of all hands on deck. So that was an amazing experience. I knew pretty early on during that internship that I wanted to get more intern experience before I pursued a master's degree. So the following school year, I did a full year internship at University of Kentucky. I literally worked with every Olympic team there except for the golfs. So everything from baseball to volleyball to women's basketball to soccer to gymnastics, everything in between. And that was awesome. I definitely appreciated that experience because I learned so many different things from working with different types of athletes and just learning sport cultures, which I think is a really valuable thing, that every group that you work with is a little different, and every sport kind of has their niche things. Even if you compare an ice hockey team, for example, compared to, a field hockey team, they kind of have their things. And so being at Kentucky, I got a chance to kind of learn some of that and just be exposed to really high level training, learned a ton about Olympic lifting. Their staff there is huge on Olympic lifting. So that really set me up well. After that, I took a grad assistant position at Mississippi State, where things were 180 degrees different because they have a lot less sports. And I only worked with 3 sports while I was there. So I had women's tennis. I assisted with volleyball and assisted with softball. Eventually I took over volleyball. And that was kind of it. So my world revolved around these 3 teams, and each individual on those teams and how we could really, really invest in them to make their experience as best as possible. So my supervisor at the time was really big into PRI, so I got to learn a lot about that, which I still use some of here and there. But being in that type of setting, it really made a lot of sense to be able to get really, really individualized. After I graduated, so that was 2 years, after I graduated, I took a position up at UConn where we met back in the day.
Yep.
I worked with swimming and tennis, both men's and women's for both. And then I also assisted with track and field, a little bit with softball and a good bit with volleyball. So that was another 180-degree switch, because I went from having 24 athletes that I was responsible for to 70 on one team and 20 on two other teams. So just a huge learning curve for me in terms of just like managing people, managing a room, being prepared for just all the different, sharp left turns and sharp right turns that can happen in a lift with that many kids. And so I'm so grateful for that experience, because I feel like after learning how to manage that, I feel like I could manage anything. And so that was awesome. I was at UConn for a year. And then after that, I took an assistant director position at Georgia Southern, where it was more similar to UConn in the sense that I worked with 5 teams. So I worked with volleyball, men's soccer, swimming, softball, and track and field. And so kind of manipulating and managing people and staffs and expectations and how this staff works and how that staff works. There was just a ton of growth in that time. And I'm really grateful for that experience too, just to kind of see what, again, the different sport cultures and the needs, and how can I provide the best service to the staffs and the athletes as well. So I was at Georgia Southern for a little over a year and a half. And then after that, I took the position I'm in now at Florida State, where I work with volleyball and beach volleyball. It is like the best job ever. I like I said, I'm a volleyball, player by origin, I guess. And I truly like it. It is the best. It's so fun. I certainly had a lot more exposure to indoor than I did beach coming in. And so that was a bit of a learning curve at first. It's probably easy on the outside to be like, oh yeah, like the same, but just like a little different. Oh, it's just volleyball, but in sand. And that couldn't be further from the truth. It's so different. So definitely the learning curve of, the sport demands that are different, but also the individuals, the athletes are different, and their strengths and weaknesses and things that come natural to them are different compared to the court players, the indoor players compared to the beach players. So that's been really fun to kind of learn and just figure out as I go on here.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That's a great story. And there's a few things that I kind of wanted to build off of that, because I remember when we were at UConn, and I'm obviously super like every time I see your Instagram story, I'm like, oh, I'm so happy she's like actually in a spot where like things are going really well, and she's like crushing it. And obviously it's kind of wild. I mean, it seems like you've lived most of your collegiate career at the Division I level. I mean, you talk about like some of the universities you mentioned, right? So like, and it's funny because you started off at Radford, right? And Radford's in Virginia, is it not?
Yeah, it's in Southwest Virginia. It's very close to Blacksburg,
Okay.
kind of that southwest corner of the state. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Because I think I applied to Radford. I looked at it as like one of the schools that wanted to try to play baseball at way back when, a long time ago. Yeah. But it's funny because then obviously you spent some time there, and you're from how far outside of Philadelphia are you from?
I'm from like 25-30 minutes. There's a huge mall outside of Philadelphia, and that mall is actually in my hometown. So
Nice.
yeah, so it's an easy train ride. When I was at Temple, I would walk from my apartment to the train station and just take the train right into town. And
nice. Yeah, that's cool. I thought Philadelphia was really cool. We played Temple. I think it was like the last game of our 2019 season. I think that was it. Yeah. When we went down there, I wasn't really sure what to expect, because I'm used to just like New York City and Boston, or like where you know what I mean? So
sure.
I went down there and I was like, this place is fantastic. I thought the architecture was really cool. They actually had like good Italian food, which usually like when you move away from the Northeast, it's always like
trust me. Yes. Trust me. You are right about that. Yes.
Yeah. So I remember, I don't know if you ever met Andrew Smith, because I think you left before he got.
Oh, okay. I know who you're talking about. Yeah, I know of him.
Yeah. We went to this Italian spot. I think it was oh, what was it called? What was it called? I'll remember it before the end. It was like it's not a chain, but like one of the guys, like a famous chef or something like that. I forget what it is. I'll remember the name. It was something Italian, but yeah, and I was like, yeah, this place is super cool. You know what I mean? I was like, it's a little unique, had a little bit of different vibe to it. We ended up getting crushed by Temple. I think we were up 14-0 at half. And then it's funny because if you were I was looking at the Instagram, like updated scores on the story after the game. Right. And I'm looking and it's like going through I'm like, okay. So like we were up 14-0 at half. Cool. And then you click again and it was like 56-14 is the final or something. I'm like, wow, that escalated pretty quickly. But yeah, awesome spot. But one thing I did want to touch on is obviously like when you were at UConn, like you mentioned, that was you and I met, and JC and JD were there at the time. And I remember like we would be in those offices when you would be trying to handle some of the teams you were working with during that time. And we would just be like, man, I really hope that she ends up in like a good spot. Cause I know it was a challenge, right? Like it was a challenge. And I know that you and I had kind of like talked about it a little bit while you were there and you kind of opened up about like, what, the challenges that came about, and every job is going to have its challenges. But one thing I remember you specifically telling me was, and now it's kind of like interesting backtracking, is your experience at Mississippi State and some of these other places. Right. And so like, when you said at Kentucky that you were able to learn like sport cultures, right? Like understanding sport cultures and being able to kind of like understand the differences between the two and just understand the difference, like the importance of understanding them, right?
Yeah.
How did that kind of like shape how you approach things when you got to like Mississippi State, which is probably totally different than Kentucky, which is totally different from UConn, right? Like, so like, it's kind of like you establish that at Kentucky. It was like, okay, this is important to know. And then you're going to continue building on that going forward, right? And then it was like, all right, now I'm on Mississippi State. Like this place is totally different. My responsibilities are totally different. The job is different. It's a different culture in itself. I'm in Mississippi, right? Like, you know what I mean? So how did you that kind of like shape and kind of form some of the ways that you were able to perceive the experiences that you were having at Mississippi State and beyond that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that the most honest answer I can give is that in the moment, I had no awareness of it. I wasn't like set out at Kentucky to be like, okay, I want to learn what divers are like, or I want to learn what men's soccer players are like. It was just kind of an accumulated sum of observations, which I think is like so important. And that's one of the things about my time at Kentucky is that I spent so much time on the floor that like, it's not like I was, like at practice all the time or doing this or doing that, but just like seeing how the athletes interacted with one another in the weight room or conditioning or whatever it was. Like that, I think that like it's a missed opportunity if you don't pay attention to those things. I think that, so shifting from there to Mississippi State, like I didn't really go into it thinking like, oh yeah, I'm going to have like way less athletes. So we're going to like invest more in them and do all these individualized things. I wasn't really like, I don't think I had that mindset so much. I think my mindset was more just like, I'm going to jump in with 2 feet and whatever that looks like, it's going to look like. And I learned very quickly, actually from working with the softball program and the head coach at the time, who's someone I have so much respect for, Van Studman. She just like really valued support staff being completely in on the program. And so I just wanted to be the best reflection of her as the leader of the program as I could be. So what she valued, I valued, and it turned out that it was for the betterment of everyone, of the athletes and the staff as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. And just so we know, I remember the name of the restaurant. It came to me, Osteria Philly. Is that
okay? I actually haven't heard of that.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably so many like Italian restaurants there or whatever. I remember it was one my brother was like, you need to go to. But anyways, yeah, I just wanted to, I was like, dude, you're Italian. You cannot forget the names of these restaurants. Like, what is it? You got to get this on right. So I feel a little better now. Unfortunately, I don't have like I know like some of these podcast hosts have like people on the side like fact checking and like data checking for them. Like as they're like I don't have some dude I could just be like, hey,
some like producer on the side. Yeah.
Yeah. I might just like hire my little brother, my 20-year-old brother, just be like, hey, can you just sit in the back there and just like check things for me whenever I need to? But no, that's a great answer. And I appreciate that. Yeah. And so then, you move on to UConn, right? And this is kind of one of the questions that I was thinking about posing in the sense of like, before we hopped on, you had mentioned like, wow, like my experiences kind of, and just your explanation of your experience have kind of changed, right? Like who you are now is a little bit different than who you were before, whether it be, professionally or personally or both. Right. So kind of like meshing that with the idea of like good and bad experiences, right? Like obviously we talked about like some of the things that you experienced at some of these stops were super challenging. They're probably a little bit different in each place, right? But what would you say were some of the, if we were kind of like break this into 2 pieces and we'll just start with one, what would you say were like some of the really good experiences that you feel have shaped how you are now and how different you are now versus how you were then? We'll start there with the good stuff, right? Like
Yeah.
might as well, it's Thursday, right? It's Friday Eve. Might as well start off with the good stuff. What are some of the good things that you feel have happened to you and that you've experienced that you feel have contributed to this change in who you are as a person and as a coach now versus who you were then when I knew you back at UConn?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because honestly, like I know this is going to sound a little bit definitely cliche, but like the good things that happened to me were like the list that didn't go well, right? Because those were the times that I got to learn. And like I I used to like I'd be so hard on myself. I still am hard on myself, but I used to be so hard on myself when, you know, I would have an experience or like something wouldn't go as best as I would want it. And I'd be like, gosh, I should have known. But then when I really reflect, I'm like, okay, well, like, how could I have known that, you know, this kid was going to show up in a boot and that kid was like going to be just like not wanting to be here today and just like different things like that. So I think like the good things that have happened, honestly, is that I was put in situations where like I felt like I had no choice but to seriously reflect and figure out like I want to stack the deck in my favor so that like I have the best chance of like that whatever went wrong last time is not going to go wrong again. And just kind of like learning from each day, and trying to like, it's only a mistake if you repeat it. Like if it happens once, like, you know, maybe in some instances I could have thought it through better, or I could have been a little more prepared in some way or another way. But if I learn from it and move on and make sure it doesn't happen again, that's the best outcome. Right. So that I think that's kind of my first take. The other thing I would say is just like having mentors who were really willing to like invest in me as like myself and not just like a staff member of their staff, not just like someone that's filling a spot for this year or however many years at X school, right? They're people that like, I still talk to Mo and I still talk to Joel and keep in touch with pretty much everyone on the staff that was there when I was there. And so like people who were genuinely interested in like, who were interested in helping develop me in the time I was there, but also people I can, you know, kind of fall back on now of like, hey, would you do this, all of this in one day? Or, hey, like, have you ever done this? Have you ever tried this? And that sometimes they're like, what the heck? No. Okay. I just thought I would ask.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Yeah. Mo and Joel are great. I actually been meaning to get them on the podcast too at some point.
You have to, you've got to.
Yeah. It's, I might even just get them on at the same time. It'd just be like a little like duo situation, but yeah, no, it's interesting. And that's probably like what I'm thinking is like you deciding that like the tougher things that have happened to you are actually what you're going to slot as like the good experiences you've had that have helped you is probably a testament to why you're able to say now that you have, made some of these changes, right. And that you have improved and you develop. I think everybody would love to say, hey, 5 years ago, right, I'm a better version of myself now than I was then. And, you know, it doesn't happen super fast, right. I think these things take time. At least this is like where I'm at now with this whole like development thing is like, it'll be funny. Like, I feel like in the moment we think things are happening so fast and we're always like nervous and anxious about like, am I developing fast enough? Am I better than I was 10 seconds ago? Right. And I think that that's great. Like, I think those are good attributes to have, but then like, I don't know if you've ever like actually truly like reflected back on something like, I don't know, maybe like the course of like, 2 to 3 years prior. And you say to yourself like, oh, like, this kind of makes sense how that all kind of came together. And like, it seemed like in the moment it was like frantic and like, I couldn't figure out like what was going to happen and everything needed to happen in this way. And then you're kind of like, oh, that kind of like makes sense that like this came into this and this built into that. And it's like funny how slowly it actually kind of all comes together. Right. And it's still coming together. Like, it's like this one long like puzzle, but I think that that's great. And I'm glad. So I think the next question, obviously the follow-up would be like, what were some of the experiences that you had that I don't know, I classify some of the experiences I've had like those ones you wake up on like a Sunday night or whatever, like right before and it's like 3 a.m. and you just want to sleep, but you're just thinking about like that mistake you made like 5 years ago, and you think in your mind that like everyone else is still thinking about it who like noticed it, right? And you're like, oh my, why did I do that? Like, it's almost like cringy to the point where you can't even like lay there still, so That's a little bit, it happens sometimes, right? So
Yeah.
what would you say were some of the experiences that you've experienced that were, I don't want to say bad, but just maybe sort of like lessons learned that you feel have kind of shaped who you are now?
Yeah. So I think my time at UConn was like this balance that, well, I guess maybe after my time at UConn, there was a balance component that I had to learn something first before I could learn the balance, right? So when I got to UConn, like I feel like I learned a ton from Mo about just like having a strategic approach and just being very, very like organized with things. And so that made me like I'm a pretty type A person
Yeah.
as it is, and then kind of having that the experience I had at UConn, it made me like a lot more type A because there's so many things to manage, so many people, so many things going on. There's again, so just for context, the way that the lifts would work, the men would be upstairs doing dry land training while the women were downstairs lifting for 1 hour, and then they would flip flop. So it was basically more than 2 hours when all was said and done
Yeah, I
of
remember
training
that.
where
Yeah.
I'm delegating the dry land training to someone else on the staff, and then I have the lift going on. It's probably me and one other person downstairs on the floor with the 35 or however many of one gender, and then one coach upstairs doing dry land training with the other. And so just kind of like balancing that and having a super systematic approach helped me a lot as a coach. But I don't really have any specific examples coming to mind. But moving on from there, and especially into the position I'm in now, like loosening up the reins a little bit and just being okay with athletes expressing themselves as athletes. And like they are, the ones I work with now are extremely high level. And so like they've gotten here by being the way they are for a reason. And so I don't have to like, stare at my ceiling all night, like thinking about how I need to change their jump strategy for every single jump that they do. Right. I just have to kind of be okay with letting them be athletes.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
And would you say that could be attributed, like that philosophy could be attributed to letting them operate and express themselves in training as they are, and how they approach training, right? Like their personalities, kind of like their characteristics, how they, what time they want, not necessarily what time they want to show, but like you're going to have athletes who are there like 15 minutes to the training session prior, right? And you're going to have some that are going to still be on time, but they're going to kind of be like coming in, right? And they're going to kind of be like a little giggly. Maybe they're just like talking with their friends about like what happened with, the day before and all that kind of stuff. But like do you kind of feel like there's a little bit of like free reign as well, with like allowing them to kind of like approach things and obviously operate in the training session in the way that you feel they would need to, in the way they would?
Yeah, I think that there has to be a very, very solid line between like, okay, look, like I'm gonna demand a lot from you. Like I want you to look at me as like a person that you respect. And I don't want to just be like, oh yeah, like, she's the strength coach that we can just kind of do whatever we want with, right? There definitely has to be that line of respect that's established from the jump. And so like, if the standard is that like 5 minutes before the lift you're ready to start, then that's what it is. And so like, yes, letting people be themselves, but also like helping them to understand like we're going to put structure in place for you and it's going to be for your benefit later on. Like it might be annoying now, but you're going to see it. And that's why in my experience, the ones who are showing up 10 minutes or 15 minutes before and they're on their foam roller are the older players, the more experienced ones, the ones who know their body better and know that like, hey, you know what, like I'm feeling it today. I need a little more. I'm gonna get in here and make sure that I'm as prepared for this training session as possible. So I think that, when there's work to be done, there's work to be done. But aside from that, like, yes, I am huge with like, I want my athletes to be who they are. And I think that that's another piece of that concept of like loosening up the reins, is that like, I'm open to like being goofy in front of my athletes and like showing them my personality and who I really am. And I would have been very against that when I was at UConn, because I felt like I needed that like guard almost, just to kind of like establish that like I'm in charge in this room kind of vibe, which is definitely important. But I think that there's a balance of like, if I show the athletes I'm comfortable with myself, then hopefully that makes them feel comfortable with themselves. That's kind of my goal with that.
Yeah, it's like a sense of vulnerability, right? You show them like, hey,
Yeah.
like I'm human, and then they feel like, oh, like we can actually have a conversation with this person, and we can talk to Shannon about things. And obviously, like in a sense, like I see that as like I remember when I was at Quinnipiac, I think it was Coach Burjesh Patel, but he was like, yeah, like I think there's a lot of like research going around right now about like how athletes operate when you put them in a comfortable environment versus an uncomfortable environment. So like I think he and this should not be quoted because I don't know like if it, but this is real, but this did happen. Like I walked in one morning and he was like, hey Ant, where does mobility come from? And I was like, this has got to be a trick question. Like this is got, you know what I mean? I was like, I know that this is not like a 7:30 in the morning, like, straight ahead question, right? So I'm like, there's something here. So we're kind of like talking about it. And he's like, yeah, he's like, it comes from your brain's ability to kind of allow you to have access to in your, some compliance with your tissues, right? So he's like, my answer was more built around like, oh, like structural stuff, right? And then I was just like, he's like, no, it's really like honestly your brain's ability to like allow you to have access and allow you to feel strong and stable in certain positions, right? So he's like, here, go bend down, touch your toes. And I was like, all right. And I did. And then I stand back up and he gets up and he gives me this big hug, right? I'm not even kidding. Like he gives me this big hug, right? And I'm like looking at like one of the other coaches who was there with me. I was intern at the time, and I'm like, what's going on? I'm like, I'm getting a hug right now. You know what I mean? So like, and then he's like, all right, like bend down, touch your toes again. And I did. And I was like, palms to the floor, right? Like I'm like, good. You know what I mean? I'm solid. And I'm like, what is going on here? Right. And he's like, yeah, he's like, I just wanted to try that out because like, obviously I gave you the hug. So obviously you're feeling, well, like, some people would have felt uncomfortable, right? You make the argument there, but I felt like, I was like, all right, this is like one of the guys I trust. He's an awesome dude. You know what I mean? Good friend of mine. And he's giving me these hugs. So like, yeah, I feel like this is a little bit more of like a welcoming environment now. Like we're in a good place. And I was able to like kind of express. So again, like, I don't know what that was, but I took it for what it was. Like, hey, that's cool. So like, and that's how he approaches his training when it comes to, the athletes he's working with. Like everyone who walks through the door, it's like, hey, how you doing? How's your day? Like, what can I do for you kind of thing? Like, addresses them by name, maybe makes a joke or makes them laugh a little bit, right? It's not this like rigid, like structured set, situation, right? And obviously they thrive in that atmosphere, right? So I think that there is something to that too, where it's like, you're probably like, hey, I'm going to be able to get more out of my athletes because of the fact that they feel like they're in a setting where they're working with somebody who's like a human just like them,
Yeah.
right? You're obviously a
Yeah.
former volleyball player, right? So they probably connect with that. So kind of go along with that. So one thing I want to start really doing is like the podcast, despite how much I just rambled, like it should really be about you, right? So I want you, as uncomfortable as it may be, to kind of talk about your strengths and some of the things that you feel you're much better. Like in my personal opinion, like I said, we noticed right away, like when I was you, kind of like, oh, she's definitely type A. She's high energy, she's super focused, she's super like, into what she's passionate about, what she has going on here. And one of the other things I thought you had was a ton of discipline, because the reality is like, I only knew your experience at UConn, but like we said, like we talked about, I was like, yeah, that was a tough situation. You got like two lift groups going on at once. One's upstairs, one's downstairs. You're trying to be everywhere at once, right? And obviously dealing with a large group and a diverse group, like all these different things, right? But you still showed up every single day, and like we knew when you were in the room, and we knew, not that you need to be like super loud, but we knew you were there and you were going to be the same person every single day. So I think there's a sense of like discipline there, right? So that's kind of like my take. But I think, why don't you kind of talk to us about what you feel your strengths are now versus what they were then, right? Or maybe just what they are in general, like the things that have allowed you to develop and acquire more skills and more strengths along the way.
Yeah. I have to make a quick comment. The irony about the progress of this, and this is so awesome, but the story you just told about comfort zones versus uncomfort zones, and then now asking me to talk about my strengths, which I feel like is not always, easy thing for people to do. But
Yeah.
Here we are, and let's go.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
no, I think that I would like to think that I like clearness. I like things to be concise and clear. And so one of the things that has been a kind of a cool progression, and not, again, like I didn't set out knowing this would happen, but is like when I was at Mississippi State, and even there was sort of some things like this at Temple, with like individualizing programs for different athletes, and even just like choices for like, accessory exercises. You can do leg curls on the physio ball or on the slide board or on the TRX straps or whatever, and kind of like pick what suits you to an extent. And also the education that comes with like okay, this is a privilege. Okay, don't just pick the easy thing, those kinds of things. But it kind of like allowed me to really like dive into like progressions and needs and things like that. And so one of the things that like, as I'm graduating and finishing up at Mississippi State, I'm like, oh, I need a portfolio. Okay. Like I need like a training philosophy. I need a coaching philosophy. Like, what are those things? Like, so, if anyone is listening, who's like an intern, like, like, yeah, you need one. Like, you got to start thinking about it. You got to start putting things together. And so, so one of the things that I kind of came to, I'm sure that I listened to it somewhere or read it somewhere, that certainly is not original, but is that everything in training is about accepting force or applying force. And so that, like, to me, it has over the years truly been like a staple of my programs. It doesn't matter to me what teams I'm working with, what sport it is, what, is it men, is it women, is it, swimming, is it volleyball, is it beach volleyball? It doesn't matter. That's like a really, really basic foundational principle for me as a coach. And so I think like having something that's actually turned so consistent has helped me to have a lot of like clarity and conciseness in like, what am I trying to do in training? And so like, I feel like I'm going to botch this a little bit, but it's the idea of like having principles. You don't have to have rules that you stick to every time, but it's principle based. I would like to think my training philosophy is. And so like everything branches out from there. Like I have a really, really concise kind of starting point and foundation. And so like everything else really goes from there. I think that like, I genuinely love to learn. Like I think there is kind of what you were saying before, like the rigidity of feeling like, oh my gosh, am I like better than I was 10 seconds ago? Right. That kind of always chasing your tail in that way. I think like as I've gotten older, I've experienced a sense of freedom from that because I read most and kind of consume content most about things that genuinely interest me. It's not to say that you shouldn't try to improve your weaknesses. Obviously you should. And there's topics within strength and conditioning that are more challenging for me to learn about or take in information about. But just like really like soaking up everything I can from the things that I enjoy learning, because it does come, easier when it's things that I'm interested in. And so like, it all kind of goes back to like, really like what drives me as a coach and wanting, like, I'm going to be in college athletics for a long time. Like I was actually just doing the math, and this school year starts my 8th year in college athletics, which is like genuinely insane, completely insane. But like my athletes, they get 4 years. Like indoor volleyball, they get really 3.5 to be a college athlete. And so like, how can I as a coach be my best to support them? And like, just from a genuine place of like person to person, like I want you to like look back on this and be like, man, like I loved my teammates and I loved going out at practice, and the workout sucked, but I still loved them because I knew that I was getting better from them. And so like just having that like genuine like ability to kind of connect with people and like help them to understand that like I'm here for their benefit. And yeah, I think so I would say that like another piece of all of this, which is probably extremely obvious by now, is that I am pretty organized person. And so I think that like, that kind of plays also to the, maybe not everyone's like this, and that's of course fine. But for me, like if I'm organized in like my personal life or like my schedule or things like that, like I know the windows of time that I have to give. Right. And so like, if I have all my own personal ducks in a row, so to speak, like I know that I can invest more in being out of practice or reading more about like a particular thing of like, I've noticed that, X athlete, jumps like this, or her data from, this piece of technology is like this. What does that mean? Like just pouring more into that, because I know that like personally, I have everything kind of in line and ready to go. And so like kind of knowing myself and knowing like, I know that I get really stressed and anxious when I procrastinate. It's not to say that I never procrastinate, but if I know that about myself, like I know that I'm going to be able to bring a better version of myself for my athletes if I'm taking care of my own stuff, kind of in a timely fashion, or just being orderly with things like that. So I think those are probably my main strengths.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I could see how like maybe even communicating some of those thoughts to your athletes, right? Like you said, like by the time some of your athletes are, juniors and seniors, they're the ones that are showing up a little bit earlier. And then that's kind of like their version of having their ducks in a row, right? Where it's like, if I can have my mind settled, be kind of like have some sort of peace of mind before I start my training session, be fully prepared, right? Prior to actually I'm probably going to get more out of it is what it is that I'm doing. So kind of like building off of that, what would you say if you had to now talk about some of the weaknesses, right? Or some of the, I guess, I don't know, what's the nice word for, like shortcomings, or like things that you'd like to work on, right? Like as a coach, and as a person, right? Like, so like you mentioned, like, some procrastinating, and, I definitely do my fair share of that. I'm sure most people do, right? But how you go about maybe overcoming some of these things that you struggle with, that you would like to get better at when it comes to your personal and your professional endeavors.
Yeah, for sure. I think that, like I was mentioning before, one of the things about my time at Kentucky and Temple as well, and even UConn too, is the amount of time I spent on the floor. It was so much. And I just got to like see reps and reps and reps of Olympic lifts, back squats, front squats, whatever it was. I just got to see a ton of reps. But then when I really kind of zoom out or fast forward, I guess, like just being patient with myself to understand that, like, sometimes, like you were saying, sometimes it feels like things are happening so fast. And then when you look back, yeah, it actually like was faster. Maybe it wasn't as fast, but I think like kind of just like being patient with myself, having the patience to say like, okay, I want to be the best kind of service to the staff and the athletes as possible. Right. But like, not everyone that you work with is going to like really understand that, and really understand that, like, that's just my genuine goal. Like, I'm not, out for anything else, or I'm not trying to like, do something or get something out of this. I just genuinely want to serve you and serve your team, or serve you as an athlete or whatever. And so kind of just the patience that comes with like the relationship building, because like relationships are so different than learning, right? Because like I learn something, I read it, I probably have to read it 5 times. I, read something else that kind of like explains that differently. I sleep on it, I learn it, okay, I know it. And that's kind of the end. And then I can implement it, right? But relationship building takes so much more time and investment. And it's not an A equals B. It's not like if you invest 5 minutes, you'll have a level 5 relationship, right? Like that's not how it works. And so just kind of being like that patience piece for me is a huge thing that like I'm still learning, and kind of letting time do its job. And one of the things I remember talking about on my interview for this position, again, it's not original. I'm sure I know I heard this somewhere else, but is take your job seriously, but never take yourself too seriously. And that's definitely something that, like, have there been times where I'm like staring at my ceiling at night because I'm like, why is the force plate data, look like this? Or like, doesn't it look like that? Or, whatever. But at the end of the day, like I'm doing the best I can, and I'm giving the best service that I know to do. And then once I know more, or once I have more buy-in, then we can kind of proceed from there. But just having the patience with myself is definitely still work in progress.
Yeah, no, I think the patience thing is huge. And I know that it's almost, I don't want to say it's like impossible, but I think it's really difficult for a lot of people to comprehend, especially like I personally think, like when I'm listening to you talk, I think we'll look back. I mean, probably like way after every one of us are gone, right? Like people will look back and be like, honestly, those people, like they're going to be like, wow, those people were idiots, or they're going to be like, wow, those guys were heroes, like whatever it was, because it was like I think I genuinely think that working with collegiate athletes and professional athletes, I think physical training and physical preparation in any sense, right, whether it be technical, tactical, physical, psychological, I think it's really difficult. You know what I mean? I know it's like it can be simple in terms of like the X's and O's. I think it's a very simple like endeavor. I think obviously the idea is that like the better you get at coaching and the better you get at articulating concepts or communicating with your athletes or connecting with them, the more efficient you get. Like I think that's what we're getting compensated for, like our ability to take really complex things and make them simple, no doubt. But that doesn't make that doesn't make this any more simple. You know what I mean? It's still a complex, and it still takes a lot of time, effort, thought, right? Like, I think there's a lot that goes into it. And let's be honest, like, this is still like in its infancy as far as like
Right.
professions. It's still a very
Right.
new thing. So like, we're kind of at this in this situation where it's like, all right, well, yeah, we should be more patient, right? Like, we should really try to like understand, like, this is a difficult thing. We have people like yourself and other coaches out there who are like, we're really trying, you know what I mean? Like, we're trying to do our best, right? But at the same time, it's like, there's a lot of different things going on. There's a lot of complexities of dealing with different personalities, and, and then there's the added politics of, the administration and, working at division 1 level, as right? It's not as simple as just go out and train the athletes and go, try to win some games and stuff like that. It may seem like that on the surface. There's a lot more that goes into it. I just remember watching some of the division 1 athletes, like, doing photo shoots and stuff like that. I'm like, wow, like, this is crazy. This is different. You know what I mean? There's a lot more going on here than just, simple training and simple. So yeah, it's complicated, to say the least. I'm not saying it's, the most impossible, but it's difficult to be patient, and it's difficult to be patient with yourself. But, yeah. So, I mean, not to kind of, go off, I'm not really sure like where I was going there, but I think that that's the idea of like, yeah, like, be patient. So like, this is difficult stuff. Like, we're not dealing with like, we're dealing with like a bunch of different athletes at all times, and who knows what the day is going to bring. Right. And it's going to require a lot of time, effort, and energy. And you're going to have to deal with a lot of people who have different or differing opinions at all times, because the reality is that we don't have a true consensus on a lot of the things that we're doing, right? Like, everybody kind of has a different way of doing things. So yeah, needless to say, it's a chaotic industry. So that kind of leads me into my next question. I know you got a hard stop, so I want to make sure you have some buffer time before you go, which you got to do at 12. But talk just this industry in general, right? Like, you have a ton of experience at a ton of different places, right? And just kind of want to just talk about like what you think of this industry currently, and things that you think that we could do in order to make it better, right? And things that in ways that it could be better for coaches like yourself.
Yeah. So I think I was saying this before we got started here, that like one of the things that makes, I think, this industry so interesting and so kind of perplexing is the fact that you could have 5 people who work as a strength coach, but all 5 people, their day-to-day looks so different. And so like, I think that as a profession, like, and as individuals, that, and again, like, for me, this is for me personally, like, being really clear about like what is and isn't my job, right? So like, that kind of comes with the evaluation conversation of like, how are we being evaluated? But also like, what's expected of me in terms of like, are we getting involved with like load monitoring? Are we getting involved with like, is it internal? Is it external? Are we doing, like, am I working with sports medicine to do different prehab or like movement screens or things like that? Like, is that them or is that me? It's kind of like, in the perfect world, right? Like, everything is blended together, right? There's a holistic approach, and we are helping with sports medicine, but we're helping with practice planning, we're helping with load monitoring, with recovery, with sleep, all these different components, right? It's in a perfect world, it's all kind of combined. But how do we kind of like delineate, okay, like, I don't want to like drive myself crazy like going after all these different avenues if it's like not really in my wheelhouse. So I think that that's something that is definitely the direction, in my opinion. That's the monitoring piece, to me, is definitely where the profession is going, or at least it's a branch off that I personally am interested in. And so like, there's so much that comes with that, from like the overlap of strength coach or sports science or athletic training or PT, how does all that kind of intertwine, and even like sports nutrition as well. And so kind of delineating some of that. I think that just like really giving people the opportunity to like, younger coaches, the experience to like, if you're in a situation where, you have a position that, you can't put any more money into, and you're kind of in a leadership position and you need more bodies on the floor, like, do that intern or that fellow or part-time coach, whatever, do them justice, like actually invest in them. I feel so strongly about that, because that was my experience of like, they're not just here to like help coach your lifts and help set up and break down, but like meet with them, figure out like what their interests are, and try to invest back in the people that are going to be coming behind us. Because I feel like that's going to be a huge piece moving forward of like, honestly, the way that I think about it is like, this intern is going to have interns who's going to have interns who's going to coach my kids someday. And so like, how can I like kind of build up the profession? And like, if it was my kids, like what experience would I want from a person that's going to be in charge of them someday? So I think, I don't know, I'm a huge believer in just pouring back into the profession. And I feel like that is a little cliche because you know, it is demanding and there's a lot on our plates and it's not always reflected in the way that we're compensated. And so for me to say, you know, what's the status of our profession? Oh, like go invest more in other people. Like that's tough, right? That is tough. But I think that like that, you know, when you really reflect, like if you are genuinely out for bettering people, then you're in the right spot. And if that's ultimately not what you're here for, then like, yeah, you're probably going to experience burnout or other things like that. So I think that's kind of my thoughts on that.
Yeah. No, that's a great answer. And I think that's a perfect place to end the podcast. I try to end it when, you know, the guests have spoken, and that is the word of Shannon. So I appreciate that. If you want to let everyone know where they can contact you, I think you got some like social media, right? If you want a social media plug or whatever, anybody who wants to get in contact with you or anything like that. Yeah. Let people know where they can find you.
Sure. So I have Twitter, Shan M Phillips on Twitter. And then Instagram is Shannon_Phillips.
Oh, nice.
Pretty sure.
Nice.
Yeah, pretty sure.
That,
search my name, you'll find me.
Yeah. Let me have my my secretary or my data checker to look it up for you.
I'm like pretty confident that's it.
Yeah, I think that might be right. Actually, let me see here. Yeah, Shannon_Phillips. Yeah, you got it. All right. Well, Shannon, thank you so much. I appreciate you joining us. This was awesome. This is great stuff. But yeah, we'll have to chop it up pretty soon here. I'm gonna stick around for 1 second. I just got to get some info from you. But yeah, appreciate it. And yeah, we'll catch up soon.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This was awesome.
All right, we appreciate it. All right, listeners, we'll catch you guys next time.